Welcome, everybody. Just give it one more minute to get everybody in. Okay. Hi, everybody. I'm Rabbi Joy Levitt, the Director of Adult Engagement here at Central Synagogue, and it's my pleasure to see all of these faces, some familiar, some new, in our ongoing attempt to connect our community to what has been going on in Israel. As you know, we have done advocacy, we have done education, we have done engagement, and we have often done that with our excellent partners, and this morning is no exception. It's my continuing honor to work with the Shalom Hartman Institute, and I know that you're in for a treat this morning. I'm going to turn it over. Oh, it's actually this afternoon. I'm going to turn it over to my colleague Ethan to introduce our wonderful speaker today. As you know, this is the last of a three-part series. Shlomo Brody began the series with the ethics of war. Yossi Klein Halevi met with us last week on the sort of temperature of the Israelis, larger in his own perspective. These sessions are all recorded, so that if you know people that missed them, please feel free to share them. And with that, I will turn it over to Ethan.
Thank you, Rabbi. It is a pleasure to be here. I missed the middle session, but I was here for the first session that we did with Shlomo Brody. I'm not going to spend a lot of time introducing Elana because I'd very much like her to get to her presentation. I'll simply say that the Hartman Institute has spent the period since October 7th really trying to dig deeply into questions of Jewish peoplehood, questions of what the relationship is between diaspora and the folks in Israel. And these are questions that we were asking long before October 7th sharpened the point on these questions. And I don't think that what we're aiming for here in all of our work is to try to invent something totally new in the aftermath of those events, but to really think deeply about the ways in which the work we've already been doing can inform the conversations that are happening right now in the American Jewish community and in the international Jewish community, and frankly, beyond our communities as well. And to that point, I'm thrilled to have Elana Stein Hain here with us today. Elana is our Rosh Beit Midrash. She is really, in many ways, a kind of learning specialist, which I'm using incorrectly in this context. She is the one who brings Jewish learning into our rooms in our building here in New York and into many, many other places across the country. And if you'd like to see her full bio, that's on our website. But suffice to say, Elana is a master teacher and a scholar, and we're thrilled to have her here today.
Thank you so much, Ethan, and thank you, Joy. It's really wonderful to be with you. I actually would love to start by just getting you to put something in the chat. I want to know what you're thinking about right now. And it doesn't have to be right now, because you might be thinking, oh, I wish I'd brought lunch to this session. But I mean, what is, when you wake up in the morning, when you're looking at the news, when you're thinking about what's going on in the Middle East right now and in America, what's top of mind for you? And we'll see if people have a similar top of mind to each other or different. But I just want to know what we're bringing into the room. So we have worry about anti-Semitism in the US. Thank you. Thinking about the hostages. Concern that there isn't a long-term plan. Israeli cousin in Jezreel Valley. An erosion of empathy. Maybe this isn't the right country to is it to live in anymore or to love anymore? Ed. Okay, 1 second. Can a cataclysm lead to two states? Hostages. When's this going to end? When will it end? Survival of Israel. I mean, what are you reading my mind, huh? I think many of us are carrying multiple of these and more. And what I actually want to do is if your first session was about the morality in war, and your second session was about taking an Israeli temperature, what I want to do in this third session is thinking about something that I believe is a phenomenon that makes most sense, maybe, for American Jews, and that is cognitive dissonance. Okay? Let's talk about what cognitive dissonance is. Leon Festinger, in the middle of the 20th century, coined the term cognitive dissonance. And he coined it about groups that were expecting a certain redemptive moment in their religious belief system and ended up being very obviously contradicted. What they expected very obviously did not happen, right? Think Waco, for some of us who remember those things, right? And he said, what do you do when what you expected and what you believed is just flatly contradicted by reality? It is just, reality is dissonant with what your cognition, what you thought was going to be. And his idea of cognitive dissonance became like a really important cornerstone for social psychology for the next 75 years. And I want to think about how it's playing into this moment for American Jews. And I want to name a few, we're going to do this the same way you did the others, which is I'm going to present for a while and then we'll open to Q&A and conversation. But I want to name a few just obvious cognitive dissonances that people may be walking around with. Here we go. I thought Israel was supposed to be the safest place for Jews. Turns out it's the place where the most Jews were killed in a single day since the Holocaust. What do I do with that contradiction between expectation, or what I've been fed, and reality? I thought America was an exception to anti-Semitism in a sort of pretty thoroughgoing way. And now I see that the anti-Semitism from the right and from the left are converging. What do I do with the flat contradiction between what I expected and what I see? I think about the importance and the possibility of political solutions to problems, of negotiated solutions to problems. And what I'm seeing is the necessity of the use of force. And I'm not really sure what I think about that use of force, right? Those are just three, okay? Let's do another one. Let's do another one. This is a great Jewish peoplehood moment, except that there are people within our communities who essentially say, wait, this is not a Jewish peoplehood moment for me. This is actually a human unity moment, or maybe even a Palestinian solidarity moment. And I'm like, whoa, I never expected that in that kind of, so now what do I, right? So there's a lot of cognitive dissonance, let alone, I think we could say, is sort of like a stepchild of cognitive dissonance. I'm all for stepchildren, by the way. That's not a negative. A stepchild of cognitive dissonance, which is kind of the dissonance that's not between what you expected and what you see, but it's just kind of being in tension about something. I want this and I want that. I want this to be possible and I want that to be possible. And I'm holding things that are in tension. And it would be much easier for me to just be black or white on an issue. But instead, I'm holding multiple. And so I want to think with you, I want to spend a few minutes talking about three sources of cognitive dissonance, both in the sense of expectation and versus reality, and also in the sense of just holding tensions, because I think we have to talk about those things. I don't think we're going to get anywhere by ignoring those tensions. And I think reasonable people will disagree about what to do about those tensions. So I've got three that I want to talk about with you. One is essentially the conversation about compassion and force. and holding the tension of the need for compassion and the use of force for self-defense. Okay, that's one. A second is what I'm going to call Auschwitz versus Sinai, which is very Hartman lingo, and we'll get to it, which is we've thought about ourselves for a while as, okay, we want to be getting past the Auschwitz moment, and we want to be able to think of ourselves as people who are more about responsibility and accountability in the world, and more about, affirmative building and shaping, and less about defending ourselves from murder. And then, now what? Okay, because we seem to be in a place of both. And then the third is Jews within our communities who we know and we love, who disagree with us, whoever the us is, right? What do we do, right? And by the way, some people may be on this call who disagree with each other about things. Surprise, right? That's why we don't ask for too much talking. It allows you to, just kind of feign the ambiguity of it all. So those are the three that I want to talk about. But before I do, I want to start with just two basic frameworks. One is a biblical framework, and the other is a social psychology framework. The biblical framework. A few weeks ago, in the weekly Torah portion, we read about the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah, of Sodom and Amorah. And in that reading appears one of the few times in the Torah where we have the sound, the chanting sound called shalshelet, meaning it goes like this, na 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 na, on one word. Now, when you hear that, it sounds like someone's taking their sweet time, doesn't it? And so this shalshelet, this sound, is on top of the word that describes how Lot didn't want to leave Sodom. He didn't want to leave as it was being destroyed. And there's a beautiful insight by a 19th century commentator, Italian commentator, on this not wanting to leave. I'm going to share my screen, okay? And I want his insight to stick with us for a minute. Now, one thing that I think is kind of interesting is we, the readers, we know that Sodom and Gomorrah are going to be destroyed. We know the end, right? Lot doesn't really know what's going to happen. He's been told. Doesn't mean he's believing it. So here's how it goes. Vayitmama. And he lingered. And that's that word, vayitmama. Right? He's taking his sweet time. Vayachaziku anashim biyado. And people took his hand, meaning the people who had come to save him from Sodom, the angels. Uviyad ishto, and his wife's hand. Uviyad shtei benotav, and his two daughters' hands. B'chemlat Hashem alav, because God was being merciful to him. Vayotziu vayanichu michutz la'ir, and they took him out of the city. In other words, the two out of the three angels who made it to Sodom, right? However you understand what angels are, but the two out of the three men who came to Sodom to save Lot, see that he's dilly-dallying and just grab his hand and say, we got to go. And Rabbi Samuel David Luzzatto, a 19th century Italian commentator who often has some insight to share, he wants to understand what is this lingering? What is this dilly-dallying that Lot is doing? So he explains it, and he tarried, right? He dallied, he lingered. One who purposely delays and sets a different time and says, I'll do something later, after such and such. That's a person who purposely delays. That's not what Lot was doing. Saying, look, I'm not going to do the exercise now, I'm going to do it. Well, maybe that's not always a purposeful delay either, but I'm going to eat my lunch after this session, right? That's a purposeful delay. But one who tarries, which is what Lot is doing, says, no, I'm here, but is still delayed. And their friend waits for them. And he says, that's what I think the word vayitmama and he's lingering comes from. It's from the word ma, the word what. His friend is waiting for him and saying, what? Meaning, what are you doing? What's causing you to be delayed, right? Or the one who tarries may be busy with something else. And when his friend begs him to hurry, he says, what? Meaning, what do you want from me? I'm making my way, right? And then he says, it seems to me that the essence of the language hitmama or hitmameya, tarrying, he says, I don't think it's about you just got waylaid. Oh, I'm here, I'm coming. And people say, what? Where are you? What? Where are you? He says, I actually think it's someone who's delayed because they don't know how to decide what to do. And what they ask people is, ma, what? What should I do? What should I do? What should I do? And his friends give him contradictory advice. And as a result, he does nothing. He's delayed by the lack of a definitive plan. That's his second explanation. His first explanation, person is delayed because they're delayed. They're trying to get there, but they're delayed. Second explanation, I think, is more relevant to us, which is they're getting contradictory information. They don't know what to do. They're not sure what to do. Or third, the students of Rabbi Yitzchak Alfasi thought that the language of hitmamu comes from the word tama, to be astonished. He couldn't move because he just couldn't believe what he was seeing. Now, I look at this and I say to myself, I feel 2 and 3 very strongly. I feel the input of contradictory information very, very, very strongly. And I ask you what, and you tell me this, and I ask you what, and you tell me that. And I also feel a sense of astonishment very strongly. I'm shocked. My spouse works on a college campus, Columbia. I've been there since 2000 when I was an undergrad. I'm astonished at what I've seen. I'm shocked by what I've seen. I will also say, if you're paying attention and looking at the losses in Gaza, it's shocking. There's a shock to be had there. So it's kind of a deer in the headlights kind of move. So that's the first thing. I just want to place us within Jewish thought in some way, in the sense that sometimes these things come all at once. But I want to do one more framing before we get to each of our actual issues. And that is the framing of what people have done with Leon Festinger's ideas about cognitive dissonance since. And I want to look at a suggestion made by a few contemporary social psychologists who actually really do a beautiful job describing what Festinger says people do. How do you deal with those moments of there's a contradiction, what? Or even astonishment, I'm not sure what I want to do. And what they come up with is 3 approaches that people have. And I'm going to take an approach, okay? But let's see what the 3 approaches are. According to Festinger, when the magnitude of dissonance is high enough to motivate action, people will use one of 3 modes of dissonance reduction. The first mode, sorry about the typo, consists of changing one of the dissonant elements, meaning changing an attitude, value, opinion, or behavior, with behavior typically being the most resistant to change, right? Something does not comport with what I think, so essentially, I change what I think, right? I change what I think. Say, well, I can't, but it sounds like it's one of these things where I kind of wholesale move from one side to the other. The second mode of dissonance reduction consists of adding consonant cognitions that reduce the overall level of inconsistency and include active attempts to seek out new information. The second approach is not swing from vine to vine, but the second approach is I'm actually going to try to add understanding that can hold these 2 together, that can help me understand how these 2 work together. The third mode, posited by Festinger, is decreasing the importance of the elements involved in the dissonant relations. We refer to this mode of dissonance reduction as trivialization. You know what I do? I trivialize the part that disagrees with what I think. Not that bad. I don't care that much. I'm not going to think about it so much, right? And trivialization is a great way to justify things. So let's just pause here for a second. When you're thinking about your own cognitive dissonances, when do you say, all right, I guess I was wrong. I guess I was wrong. I'm changed, right? When do you try to continue to hold it all together and say, wait, I wasn't wrong. I didn't understand this piece, and I have to actually add this, and I have to understand that, and I have to bring more, right? And when do you just trivialize the thing that doesn't work for you? Because I see all three of those happening in the Jewish community, all three, and in the general world, right? It could be trivializing Jewish pain, trivializing October 7th, which we've definitely seen. It could be trivializing anti-Semitism on campus, which I've definitely heard. It could be, on the other side, trivializing humanitarian crisis in Gaza. It could be trivializing the ordeal of the hostages. It could be trivializing lots and lots of things, because trivializing makes things feel less dissonant. No problem. That's a little small problem, isn't it? Right. I've seen people who say, actually, I'm switching my whole outlook. You know what? Turns out America is a hotbed of anti-Semitism. I'm done with this place. We're out. We're leaving. Right? Turns out Israel is, God forbid, I'm not going to say the words. Israel is X. I thought Israel was Y, but I actually now think Israel is X, and forget them, and I'm done, right? And it's just, I'm totally changed. Now, not shocking for somebody who has an ampersand on her wall as a wall decoration at home. I much prefer the second approach, which is, how are we going to hold this together? Is there a possibility of new information? Is there a possibility of actually looking at everything in a sobering way? And that not leading to inaction, but that leading to conviction. That's informed conviction. That's kind of my question for us, okay? So that's what we have so far. Astonishment, contradictory input, and then three approaches of what to do with it. Are we going to flip and go in one direction? Are we going to flip and ignore, essentially, any information that bothers us? Or are we going to try to hold things together? Okay? Now, I don't fault anybody who decides to flip in one direction or another. If somebody decides to trivialize, we're human. I understand it. I don't agree with it. I think it's not great. I think it has moral problems. But it's very human. I get it. But it's easy. If somebody says, oh, everything has been upended, and I can only see one side of this right now, I understand that too. I'm just not sure it's taking into account all of the pieces. So I'd rather try. It may turn out that I'm wrong, right? I'd rather try to be a little bit ambitious, okay? So with that, I want to walk into three dissonances right now, okay? And make some suggestions, and then open up to people to disagree and to say and to think, right? We're here to think together, okay? I'm going to share my screen again. Okay. Let's start with the dissonances between compassion and force, okay? There's this beautiful, beautiful statement in the Talmud, in Tractate Megillah, that I've been thinking about since October 8th. And it goes like this. Amar Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Yochanan says, Kol makom she'ata motzeh gvurato shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu, everywhere in the Bible that you find God's strength, and we really mean like force, okay? God's strength, ata motzeh an v'tanuto. Proximate to that you find God's, I guess humility would be a word that I would use here, but it's even more than humility. It's like being in league with the vulnerable. Davar ze katuv b'Torah, this is written in the Torah, v'shanui b'nevi'im, and it is seconded in the prophets, u'meshulash b'ktuvim, and it is thirded in the writings. And now the Talmud is going to give the examples. Katuv b'Torah, it is written in the Torah, Ki Hashem Elokechem hu Elokei ha'Elohim va'Adonai ha'Adonim. God, your God, is the God of gods, is the master of masters, meaning has great power. Okay? Deuteronomy 10. And right afterwards, Uchtiv Batrei, and right afterwards, the next verse says, and you know what God spent God's time doing? Oseh mishpat yatom va'almana. God takes up the cause of the orphan, takes up the cause of the widow, which of course in that environment is, these are the most vulnerable in that environment, right? So instead of God using God's power to show off or to focus on status or to be far from compassion, the opposite, God somehow holds compassion and power together. And by the way, I just want to say how incredibly countercultural this is, because we do live in a Western ethos right now that for many, you can either be powerful or you can be compassionate, not both. You're either a victim who can do no wrong, or you're an oppressor who can do no right. And this Talmudic passage is saying, no, 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 no. God is the exemplar. And I don't think the passage is saying God can do this, but humans can't. I think it's God can do this, and we should follow God's example. God holds tremendous power and tremendous compassion at the same time, in league with the powerful and in league with the vulnerable at the same time. The second example from the prophets, Shanui b'Nevi'im, this is repeated in the prophets, Ko amar ram v'nisa shochen ad v'kadosh v'gomer. So says the high and lofty one. Like, think about it even in a physical kind of way. The high and lofty one who dwells for eternity and is kadosh, is separate. And then immediately after, in the same verse in Isaiah, Uchtiv batrei ve'etaka ushval ruach. Who does God spend time with? God spends time with those who are broken and those who are lowly in spirit. God doesn't need to spend time with those people. God is up there. God doesn't have to be down here. But God's choice is, I want to be up here and I want to be down there. Mishulash b'ktuvim, it is stated a third time in the writings. Dichtiv, as is written, and this is, I like to call this work-life balance. So lu larochev ba'aravot beyashimo. You should praise God who rides upon the clouds, right? Whose name is God. And I'm thinking about, the parent who's like the CEO during the day, they're riding on the clouds. They're like very impressive. And then Uchtiv Batrei says afterwards, Avi yatomim v'dayan almanot. What is God's actual vocation? God is a parent for orphans and God is a judge for widows, meaning God comes home and changes diapers, so to speak, right? That's the way I look at it. So all three of these are examples where we say, no, no, no. You can have power, you can have compassion. You can be in league with the powerful and you can be in league with the vulnerable at the same time. And I was thinking about this for a few different reasons. One reason I was thinking about this is specifically because of the conversation about morality and war, right? Specifically about the conversation about morality and war. Just because we use our strength and force does not mean that we become people who don't have compassion, right? So there's a reason why a lot of us, we look at those examples where like the IDF returns a little Gazan girl to her family, or the IDF returns an older woman in a wheelchair to, we look at that and we say, that's who we want to be. We want to be able to have those two. But there's another piece of this for me also, which is, there's more than one piece when I think about it. The relationship between compassion and power, I think is really much more complicated than we make it out to be. And when my nephew was up north on the border, and he has an anxiety disorder. He was up north, meaning as a soldier. His mother sent me a video from an Israeli psychologist and said, I know that you talk to my son a lot, and I just want you to watch this video so that you know how to talk to him. And essentially the video was, you have to treat these people like they are incredibly fragile. So don't tell them anything about your stresses, even if it's like, I was late to an appointment, nothing. Essentially show them cat videos. That was the essential idea. It was show them extreme compassion, because although they may be holding a gun, they are much more fragile than you realize. And that was pretty eye-opening for me. I would also say another piece. My nephew told me a story, a different nephew, the one who was in Gaza. He told me that, I'm sorry that I'm going to have to say this, but I have to say this. An 8-year-old put an explosive device on his tank in Gaza. An 8-year-old walked up to his tank and put an explosive device on his tank. And he's thinking in that moment, who am I? How do I save myself and not kill an 8-year-old? And he did not kill an 8-year-old, and he got the bomb off the tank. Thank God, the explosive device. And it turns out it didn't detonate right anyway. But in that moment, right there. And by the way, there's a third, which is, well, there's a fourth, right? The first is you're strong, but you have to have compassion. The second is you have to have compassion even on people who are using their strength because they're more fragile than you realize. The third is, when is compassion compassion and when is compassion idiocy? When is power defense and when is power idiocy? Right? This is the big question. And then I would say the fourth is, and I think this is remarkable, this is actually Rashi's read. Rashi basically says, when you look at the verse in Deuteronomy that says that God is so strong, and then it says that God, takes care of the orphan and takes care of the widow, Rashi says, it's not that one is power and one is compassion. It says God uses God's power to have compassion on the orphan and the widow. You can't just hope that the orphan and the widow are going to get taken care of. You have to use what's at your disposal in order to defend them, in order to take care of them, right? Meaning you have to actually use your power in order to have compassion on your own people and defend them. So my decision here is not to choose one of these paths at the expense of the others. My decision here is to say the Talmud is suggesting you have to hold them all together. You have to hold them all together. And I think that's really hard. And I think the way that that's going to look for different people is going to be different. So for some people, it's pressing for certain actions of humanitarian aid in Gaza. For some people, it's pressing, it's including Gazan civilians in their prayers. For some people, it's emphasizing the humanity of Israeli soldiers who are doing things to protect their children, who are doing things to protect their siblings, who are doing things to protect their parents, to protect their spouses, right? Meaning we're going to see people, but what I would just say is if we let go of any of these, I think we're in moral trouble. If we dehumanize, I think we're in moral trouble. But I do think that reasonable people can disagree. Okay, that's the first. The second, Auschwitz and Sinai. Okay. Essentially, in the early 80s, David Hartman wrote a great piece that he later said was too one-sided, which I think is really interesting to think about. It was during the Lebanon War, and he asked, should Auschwitz or Sinai be the orienting category shaping our understanding of the rebirth of the state of Israel? And he explains what he means by that. There are important differences resulting from the relative emphasis we place on these two models. In the 20th century, we've become a traumatized nation. The ugly demonic forces of anti-Semitism have horrified our sensibilities. We can never forget the destruction of millions of Jews in World War II. Many, therefore, justify and interpret the significance of our rebirth in terms of Jewish suffering and persecution. Right? Auschwitz is the frame. One often hears in speeches in Knesset and UJA fundraising dinners phrases like, never again will we be vulnerable, Never again will we expose our lives to the ugly political forces in the world. Although it is right to appreciate the dignity that comes with power and statehood, with freedom from the inconsistent and fragile goodwill of the nations of the world, it's a serious mistake to allow the trauma of Jewish suffering to be the exclusive frame of reference for understanding our national renaissance. Israel is not only a response to modern anti-Semitism, but above all is a modern expression of the eternal Sinai covenant that has shaped Jewish consciousness throughout the millennia. It wasn't Hitler who brought us back to Zion, but rather a belief in the eternal validity of the Sinai covenant. One need not visit Yad Vashem in order to understand our love of Jerusalem. It is dangerous to our growth as a healthy people if the memory of Auschwitz becomes a substitute for Sinai. The model of Sinai awakens the Jewish people to the awesome responsibility of becoming a holy people. At Sinai, we discover the absolute demands of God. We discover who we are by what we do. Sinai calls us to action, to moral awakening, to living constantly with the challenges of building a moral and just society which mirrors the kingdom of God in history. Sinai creates humility and openness to the demands of self-transcendence. Now, I have it on good authority that David Hartman, before he died, said he thought he was too one-sided with this. And I got to say, whether he would have said it or he wouldn't have said it, I think our experience right now is telling us we might need a little bit more of a balance. American Jews, we want so desperately for Jewish life to be about Sinai. We want it to be all about our responsibility. We want it to be all about our morality. We want it to be all about our affirming and our shaping and our doing. And that is amazing. But we've wanted it so badly that we've ignored anti-Semitism. We've wanted it so badly that we've ignored the dangers to Jewish survival. We've wanted it so badly that maybe even we've held Israel to a different standard than we have held other people. And we have not understood the actual dangers that it is facing. And so what I would suggest is, again, reasonable people can disagree, is instead of choosing one or the other, how do we actually hold both? How do we recognize that in America, we are currently vulnerable in significant ways, in ways that we haven't seen in a long time, and we are incredibly powerful at the same time? We have strength and we have danger. We have moral standards and we have self-preservation moral standards. Standards towards the other and standards towards ourselves. And I don't think that we can leave off either of them. It is very, very tempting. And again, reasonable people will have different balances between them. Reasonable people. What I love is in the same day, looking at what Torah is sending out and looking at what AIPAC is sending out. Same day. Do I agree with everybody about everything? No. But what I want to see is I want to see people who understand both the Sinai and the Auschwitz and do not try to trivialize one or the other. The last one, okay? This is, can we stop the recording for a second? Thanks. I think I actually can on the record. Okay. So the last model that I want to offer, and then I want to open it to your comments, is the model of Abraham and Lot. I think it's really interesting. Abraham and Lot, they go on a long journey together, right? Abraham takes Lot with him. There's clearly a kinship there. There's a care. And at some point, we find that all they're doing is fighting. All they're doing is fighting. Their shepherds are fighting. They're fighting. And I just think that the way that they separate is really something. Vayomer Avram el Lot. Avram says to Lot, Al natihi miriva beini uvenecha. Let's not have a fight between us. Uvein ro'ai, uvein ro'echa. And between my shepherds and your shepherds. Why? Ki anashim achim anachnu. Because we're kin. Let's not do this. Halo chol haaretz lefanecha. The whole land is before you. Hi pared na me'alai. Let's split up. Ima smol ve'imina. If you go left, I'll go right. V'ima yamin v'asmi'ila. If you go right, I'll go left. There's something about this splitting that feels very, it feels very right to me at this moment. I'm not talking about making decisions about boundaries of Jewish community, blah, blah, blah. I'm talking about relationships with people. My perspective since October 7th has been fight Hamas, not each other. And I maintain that perspective even now. Even if my friend and I each think that the other is endangering. Now, what can we do together? What can we not do together? These are important questions for the future, but I think there's something to, not giving up on every relationship. So I'm going to pause there with reminding us that we started with kind of astonishment and conflicting impulses or conflicting information. We move to 3 ways of dealing with that dissonance. Are we going to trivialize? Are we going to change wholesale? Are we going to try to hold things together and think in new ways? I suggested this latter one as a good way to go, specifically when it comes to strength and compassion, specifically when it comes to the moral of self-preservation and moral engagement with others, and specifically when it comes to dealing with major rifts within the Jewish community about Israel and about right now. I'm going to pause there. Happy to take questions or comments. And I do hope that this, whether you agreed or disagreed with things that I said, that you found it to be a legitimate picture of an American Jewish experience in this moment, of cognitive dissonance, of not really understanding how all of this stuff can be held together, maybe in a different way than Israeli Jews or even European Jews might be experiencing this moment.
Okay, thanks, Elana. As Marina just wrote, please, any questions put in the chat, and I will feed them over to Elana. And while you're thinking about your questions, Elana, I wanted to ask just a little bit about this question of Auschwitz and Sinai. You have it on good authority that David Hartman might have rethought that emphasis. But I wonder to myself about this in terms of the American Jewish experience with what feels like rising anti-Semitism. And I think it probably is in some sectors, and it probably is been amplified by social media and other media in other sectors. What do you think is the danger of rebalancing towards Auschwitz too far, right? In other words, what was it that David Hartman was pushing up against, and what should we still be mindful of as we think about that going forward?
Sure. I mean, if you're trying to protect yourself at every cost, at any cost, right? Let's say this: if you're a hammer, everything's a nail.
Right.
Right. So if you're a hammer looking for anti-Semitism, everything you see is anti-Semitism. And what it means is that you may do things that violate civil liberties as a result. Mm-hmm. You may cut off potential allyships as a result, right? You may actually misuse your own power as a result. Mm-hmm. But to be honest, I think that finding the balance is hard. And I think the further we move from October 7th, the cooler our heads can be to try to find a balance, right? I think after October 7th, when you start seeing, people glorifying Hamas, you're like, whoa, 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 right? As we get out, okay, so what are we going to do about DEI programs? How do we make sure that they include Jews and anti-Semitism? What are we going to do about universities? Many of them have become toxic. What are we going to do about coalitions that are have broken down, right? But I am not a pie in the sky person. I do not, if I'm proven wrong, or not if I'm proven wrong, if we see that the balance needs to continue to change, I think we got to be ready for that. Like, I think it's possible, as Ed is pointing out, the New York Times poll about, why is it that people don't approve of Biden's handling of the war? How much of that is compassion for Gazan civilians? How much of that is anti-Zionism? How much of that is even anti-Semitism, right? Meaning, like, I just think naivete.
Or how much of that is just people's inability in general to grasp complexity in the situation and just wanting one thing or the other, which is sort of what you're getting at, right?
Correct.
That's one way to solve for that sort of cognitive
Correct.
dissonance. To just say,
I just think we play this game. The polarization game is so easy, where it's like, okay, so Elise Stefanik, I'm just going to go for it. Elise Stefanik is going to corner the
congresswoman at the anti-Semitism hearings.
Yes, is going to corner a president and of a university, and I'm going to say, okay, I now hate that president of the university, and I love Elise Stefanik. And then I look up and I'm like, oh, Elise Stefanik blames Nancy Pelosi for January 6th. Okay, I hate Elise Stefanik, and now I'm back to loving that president. No, right? Too much naivete, too much team politics. It's actually, we have a concept, kabel et ha'emet min misha omro, accept the truth from whoever says it. If it's somebody who a broken clock is right twice a day, or it's somebody who says, look, I agree with you on this, but I disagree with you on that. That's reality. We've been playing in this weird team polarization as though either this group is going to save us or that group is going to save us. Got news for us. When there's polarization, Jews always lose, right?
Yep.
We need to be able to see what's happening here and see what's happening here with eyes open. Okay.
I think that's a great point, and I'm gonna throw it back to the folks at Central if they want to close. But I'll just say, Elana, thank you so much for bringing this Torah to us. We've got one more question. We'll take one more question in the chat, and then we'll throw it back to the folks at Central.
Okay.
So
Rena
you want to try to take that? This one's a little tough, Elana, as our last question, but go ahead and give it a shot.
But I think that being sober is important. I think that being sober is important. You're basically saying the parallels to Germany in the 1930s are pretty obvious. I think Bret Stephens wrote something in the Sapir journal, The Road to Kristallnacht. And it's like, here's what I want to say. If someone's too busy making fun of that title, instead of actually thinking about what he's saying and what he's pointing out, then we're making a huge mistake, right? It's too much laughing at each other, whether the right laughing at the left or the left laughing at the right. Hear what someone's saying and say, are there interventions that can be made? And let's see if they can. And if they can, great. And if we find that they can't, we have to respond to that, right? Yep. But it can't just be, I'm going to hide in my room and see if it all gets fixed. It's, okay, let's roll up our sleeves, see what we can actually do about what we're seeing. And if there are things that, if we find out that we can't, then that's a true reality, right? This is what cognitive dissonance is, right? It's, I expect X, and then I see Y, or better yet, not X, right?
Yep.
Let's not fall into that trap. Just be aware on all the sides. And when we do make progress in certain areas, don't ignore that progress either. Meaning there is currently, I'm just going to say from my own experience on the Columbia Barnard campus, there is currently an anti-Semitism task force that has been created with about a dozen Jewish faculty members. I'm in conversation with the leaders of that task force because we daven at the same shul and because my spouse is the campus rabbi. And we were talking about it. And she said to me, she's like, this is really, really hard. We don't know how successful we're going to be. But if we take the attitude that this is over before it started, we're not going to be successful at all. We have no chances of success. And so we need the support of people to ask us questions, not yell at us, but ask us questions. How are you dealing with X? How can we support you dealing with Y, right? That's what I'm seeing. And They know as much as we know. If we see at some point it just isn't working, then we have a new set of questions that we have to be asking, right? So Rena, I really appreciate that question that you asked. I really appreciate it. Because I'm done playing games, I think. That's what I've learned. I'm done playing ideological games. I'd like to respond to reality at this point.
Yeah, you're probably not done, but you'd like to be done. That's fair. I think what we know when we partner with the Hartman Institute is that it's never going to be simple. And I'm so in awe of all of you for welcoming the opportunity for complexity and resisting binary choices. And I think that last text about Abraham is the one that we want to leave with, which is that whether or not there's enough room, which is a subject for another time, obviously Abraham thought there was enough room for Lot to go one way and Abraham to go another way, whether we have the sense of spaciousness within our relationships to have that position. I urge us to take that text and remember that we are all kin. And that's not just among the Jewish people. That is, we are all human. And that ability to really hold that complexity, it's hard work. And I just want to thank you, Elana and Ethan, for reminding us how